This next question, I want you to give me an evaluation and not necessarily on quality of play, but I'm asking the question, which will be the most hotly contested competition? The offensive tackles or the offensive guards?
That's a good question, and
Because there's
I
gonna
think
be a
I'm gonna
really good offensive guard left out.
yeah, and there was maybe it was a Hey Horka question that I answered recently, or just general message board fodder, which I will back Darren up and saying, please subscribe to Blue and Gold, not just this YouTube channel that you're watching this on, but the website itself, because we do some really good work there, and a lot of really good engagement on that message board in terms of just thousands of Notre Dame fans asking questions like this. And to get back to yours, Darren, I think it's the offensive guards for the reason that you said. I was enthralled by the idea that Rooco Spindler started 10 games last year, and the only thing that took him out of the lineup was a knee injury. He might not start a game this season for Notre Dame if Billy Schrauth is actually the guy that these coaches think that he is. I think last year at this time, you were thinking, okay, Billy Schrauth, sophomore season, he's just going to be a guy. He went through his freshman season without playing much. That happens, but he's good enough to play as a sophomore. Wasn't the case because you had a couple of guys older than him and Pat Coogan and Rooco Spindler who said, okay, now I'm ready and I'm a little bit older than you. This is my time. I think Billy Schrauth has learned from that and said, well, I'm going to make this my time as a junior. Where does that leave Rooco Spindler? Like I said, a guy who started for 10 games. And by the way, if it's Rooco Spindler who ends up saying, no, I'm still a guy in this equation, I'm one of the two best guards on this team, does that mean Pat Coogan is not one of the two best guards and it's Schrauth and Spindler? By the way, Coogan is the only guy that started all 13 games along that offensive line last year. Joe Alt, Blake Fisher would have done that if they played in the Sun Bowl, but for obvious reasons, they opted out to further their careers and they ended up being NFL draft picks. All of that said, I think it's the offensive guards because of the reason that you said, Darren, that you have three guys that could start, can start, would probably start anywhere in the country, but you only have two spots for those guys to compete for. And that's going to leave someone very good out of the lineup. Whereas at offensive tackle, do we know if we have anyone that can start, will be good there? They're intriguing for two different reasons and opposite ends of the spectrum, if you will, there.
I'm not sure there are many combinations worse for Notre Dame in the opener when you think about going to A&M with the 12th man in the crowd noise, and they have two high-end pass rushers that are going to want to cause havoc on Riley Leonard all day long. And with the new offensive tackles for Notre Dame, there's some combinations that might make you a little nervous.
Yeah, and then I throw in the added element of Mike Elko being their head coach. Like, this is a team that was led by Jimbo Fisher, an offensive-minded guy. I think you're going to see a little bit of a transition there with A&M, and they get some recruits, man. Like you said, I'm filming this from Texas right now. I know the state very well. There are some dudes, and of course, it's a big enough program to where they can get some dudes from outside the state as well. And I mean, Mike Elko is going to have that thing humming. Obviously, this is year one. I've been saying it all along. I think this is the perfect spot to catch this Texas A&M team because I think in the 2025 season opener, for example, Mike Elko is going to have had a year and a half to kind of establish what that program is. There's going to be some growing pains this year, but what there also will be, Darren, is like you said, some individual performances where you're like, oh man, wait until Mike Elko is able to kind of cook something up with these guys for extended periods of time. That said, you add Nick Scorton to the equation, obviously playing at Purdue. He's a guy that can really feast on some offensive tackles. And if Notre Dame's not up to the task, Riley Leonard might be running for his life a little bit, which I watched all 21 of Riley Leonard's starts at Duke. I think he's one of the guys that you do – like, if your quarterback is going to be running for his life, he's on the short list of guys where you're like, okay, maybe we can live with that a little bit. But obviously any program across the country would tell you number one is protecting the quarterback. I don't care if he's as elusive as, I don't know, Lamar Jackson at Louisville. Like, you want to give him some time to throw the ball. You want to give Riley Leonard some time to throw the ball and just kind of settle into this Notre Dame equation as well. Texas A&M has some guys that can kind of put a disruptor on that from the very start. And I think that's what a lot of the conversation has been about with that team is, hey, maybe Mike Elko is still trying to implement some things, but they have some game records that can throw you off course right from the very start.
I'm thinking, Tyler, July 1st, 2023, if we were having a football conversation about the Irish, I have a feeling we probably did not cover what was going to happen at Clemson when your four-string center had to be on the field in Ashton Craig. And now it feels like he's the guy that you feel good about. There's not going to be a lot of stress at the center position to start the year. If you get into a spot where the injury bug hits the center position, how comfortable do you think Joe Rudolph is with the backup center position at this time?
Not very, to be completely honest with you. I think there was a lot of experimentation going on in spring ball at that position. I mean, you saw countless guys. I think Joe Otting was snapping at one point, and he's a guy that has hardly played any football, if any, at this level. I mean, I'd have to go through Pro Football Focus and look at the snap counts, but I think maybe he got some garbage time snaps somewhere. I will tell you that the 3 or 4 games that Ashton Craig got to start were huge, because I think it did lay enough of a foundation to where you're like, okay, he's actually a guy, he can play at this level. But it's still only about a month of football, Darren. And if you have to go to one of those options that I just mentioned, like a Joe Otting, maybe you move some guys around, like some of the more experienced guys. I'm not sure. Like, there was a point maybe last year at this time where Andrew Christophic, or I can't remember who it was snapping the football. And that's when it told me, like, oh man, if Zeke Correll, who's a good football player, a very fine football player, if he goes down, maybe you don't have a good football player snapping the ball to your center at that point, or to your quarterback at that point from center. So very worried. I mean, some of the offensive line is just like, it's an injury or two away from disaster when you think about some of these guys who are trying to play uh, in a reserve capacity. Like, there's so many spots outside of the guard position, like we just mentioned. There's 3. You can sustain an injury at guard and feel fine if you're Notre Dame. If Charles Jagasaw goes down, for example, you're starting Tosh Baker and Emil Wagner, or is Gerby Lambert good enough to come in the summer and play right away? I mean, he's 319 pounds or whatever. I wrote a story on Blue and Gold a couple of weeks ago. I think that was kind of surprising to everybody. So he's got the size, but does he have the skill? Does he have the acumen? Can he stay in front of a Nick Scorton for 60 plays or whatever it may be? And like you said, that the same thing goes back to Ashton Craig at center. I think Joe Rudolph is in a position where he's like, man, that guy better stay healthy, because if he doesn't, we're going down to some options that I'm not sure I want to put into a football game.
Tyler, finally, just to build on what we were talking about, the Texas A&M game with all the built-in chaos that can happen, road game. It's going to be loud down there. They've got a really, really good defense on paper. From
Yeah.
a Notre Dame fan perspective, should they be concerned about Notre Dame's offense with a new offensive coordinator? I think a lot of the system that the Irish had last year, there's bits and pieces of that still in this Denbrock offense. But should Irish fans be worried about the Notre Dame structure of the offense and execution going into that first game?
2 things that always worry me about a team's offense, which generally takes a little longer to come along than a defense early in a season, are who are you facing? And like you just said, Texas A&M, and I said it earlier in this conversation, has dudes on defense, and they have a dude that knows defense coaching them up. That's worrisome. And whether or not you're at home or on the road, and they're on the road in front of what EA Sports just called the toughest place to play in college football. That's a conversation for another day, Darren, because I think A&M's 4-3 home record, I think in 2022, they might have gone like 4-1 or 5-1 last year. They lost 3 games, and one of them to Appalachian State a couple of years ago. So Notre Dame could have something to say about that. But yeah, it is worrisome. New offensive coordinator. And of course, Mike Elko's new too. So maybe it's not, running smoothly from the start for them, but like I said, it takes offenses longer to get going. And your first test is against a very talented team in front of 102,000 people with a head coach. If there's anyone who can have things going nicely from the start, it's probably Mike Elko. I mean, look what he did at Duke. That was a pretty fast turnaround at a place that shouldn't turn around that quickly. Parlayed it into one of the most lucrative and honestly, even this University of Texas grad right here will tell you, if you can be the head coach at Texas A&M, it's not a bad gig. Mike Elko has a good gig. He has a good team. Notre Dame's going to be up against that in the first week of the season. So Mike Denbrock has his work cut out for him. Absolutely. Especially considering there's a new quarterback, a bunch of new wide receivers, and some new starters along the offensive line. So if Notre Dame's offense is humming and looking nice, I think you have some reason for optimism. I think it could be a little bit of a different story than, say, Ohio State 2022, where you saw Tyler Buckner struggle and you heard Marcus Freeman going into that game say, I don't think we have an offense to go toe-to-toe with an Ohio State, so we're going to dial it back and just try to grind this one out, essentially. You're not going to see Mike Denbrock say that. And if they're able to actually execute and put some points on the board, I think you're looking at a Notre Dame team that kind of takes a sigh of relief, especially if they get that win. That's the most important thing. But if they look good offensively doing it, I think you're going to say, all right, we kind of laid a foundation here. Here's the team that we can be going forward.